on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, lovely people. Welcome along to another episode of Neil Oliver Live on GB News TV and on the wireless set. Tonight on the show, I'll be joined by American physician and biochemist Dr. Robert Malone. We'll be discussing, amongst other things, a lawsuit which claims Pfizer exaggerated the effectiveness of the COVID vaccine. I'll then be joined by Dr. David Strain, eminent Associate Professor of Cardiometabolic Health at the University of Exeter, who is a great believer that the vaccine products saved us from a more severe pandemic. Finally, I'll be speaking to the organiser of a Northumberland truck run which lit up the North Tyne Valley and raised spirits and more than £10,000 for charity. All of that and lots of chat with television presenter, restaurateur, author and lightning conductor for Common Sense, Tonia Buxton. But first, an update on the headlines with Elizabeth Callaghan.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth Callaghan in the GB Newsroom. The UK and Italy have agreed to finance a plan to return migrants to Tunisia as the Prime Minister warned that illegal migration could overwhelm European countries. Rishi Sunak addressed a crowd in Rome today after meeting Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Malone. The agreement will see the two countries assist in the voluntary return of migrants currently stuck in Tunisia, which neighbours Italy, and is often used as a gateway to Europe. The Prime Minister says it's now more important than ever to tackle illegal migration.
If we do not tackle this problem, the numbers will only grow. It will overwhelm our countries and our capacity to help those who actually need our help the most. The cost of accommodating these people will anger our citizens, who won't understand why their money should have to be spent on dealing with the consequences of this evil trade. It will destroy the public's faith, not just in us as politicians, but in our very systems of government.
An IDF official says Israeli hostages mistakenly killed in Gaza had been shirtless and holding up a white flag. Israeli troops opened fire on Yotam Haim, Samer Talalka and Alon Shamritz after they were misidentified as a threat. They were killed in an area of intense fighting where Hamas terrorists often wear civilian clothing and use deceptive tactics. A spokesperson for the IDF called it a tragic event that had happened due to the nature of the conflict. Meanwhile, the deaths of those hostages have led to protests in Israel and here in the UK. Pro-Palestinian demonstrators gathered outside the Israeli ambassador's house in London today. They called for an end to the bombardment of Gaza and criticised the ambassador after she rejected a two-state solution to the conflict. A second migrant has died after another small boat emergency in the Channel. It comes after a separate incident in which a Sudanese national died off Dunkirk this morning. Another 2 migrants are missing after that rescue, where a small boat carrying more than 60 people got into difficulty. A man suspected of piloting the boat has been arrested by French police. The incidents take the total of confirmed migrant deaths in the Channel so far this year to 10. Police in Norwich say there is no indication of third-party involvement after a body was recovered in the search for missing woman Gaynor Lord. That's after authorities carried out a post-mortem examination. Norfolk police say the body will be formally identified tomorrow. British schoolboy Alex Batty, who went missing 6 years ago in Spain, is expected to return to the UK today. The 17-year-old was just 11 when he vanished with his mother and grandfather. He was found on Thursday in France after leaving the spiritual commune where he was living with his mother. Alex's grandmother, who has legal custody, says she can't wait for them to be reunited. A Royal Navy destroyer has shot down a suspected attack drone targeting the merchant shipping in the Red Sea. Defence Secretary Grant Shapps says HMS Diamond hit the target overnight with a Sea Viper missile. The ship recently arrived in the region as part of efforts to increase maritime security. Donald Trump's former lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, is to appeal after being ordered to pay more than £116 million for defaming 2 women. Giuliani claimed that surveillance footage showed 2 election workers, Wandrea Shea Moss and her mother, Ruby Freeman, concealing and counting suitcases filled with illegal ballots. They received a deluge of racist messages, including threats of lynching, and were forced to relocate. Giuliani falsely claimed he'd been blocked from presenting his own evidence. He's described the payment as absurd. Police have released CCTV images of 3 men wanted for questioning after graffiti relating to the Israel-Hamas conflict was sprayed onto an MP's office. The constituency office of Fariel Clark, who's the MP for Enfield North, was vandalised last month. Police say they've examined CCTV footage from the local area and are appealing for anyone with information on the men to contact them. The RAC says petrol prices have fallen to their lowest level in more than 2 years. A litre of unleaded petrol now costs an average of 142 pence, a price not seen since the end of October 2021. Diesel prices, however, have not fallen. The news comes during one of the busiest times of the year on the roads, with experts saying prices should continue to fall steadily every day in the run-up to Christmas. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Neil.
What number will suffice? How high must it go? How many dead? Soon we'll count the 12 days of Christmas. What will they bring this year, instead of gold rings and calling birds and partridges in pear trees? When will we, as supposed civilisations, say enough is enough? There are so many numbers, it's hard to know where to start. Around the world, the number of excess deaths in the aftermath of the COVID pandemic, whatever COVID was, and the rollout of the products marketed as vaccines keeps rising, cycling ever upwards, glowing as bright red as any warning light on a car dashboard, surely declaring something somewhere is dangerously wrong, and yet still the world carries on regardless. Barely a question asked about why so many people, apparently fit and well, who should still be alive and well, are dropping down dead before their time. We are in fact ignoring plane loads worth of extra deaths, one plane load after the other, as it were, week after week, silently falling. But no matter, apparently, certainly not worth talking seriously about in any public forum, far less seeking and finding explanations, remedies. The Battle of Borodino was fought between Russia and France in the September of 1812 and made a hellish heap of slain, the equivalent, according to British-Canadian historian Gwyn Dyer, of a fully laden jumbo jet crashing every 5 minutes for 8 hours. Those are dreadful numbers to contemplate, even after all this time. More than 2 centuries later, historians still wonder at that carnage, measurable in plane loads. And yet right now, we watch our own slow-motion Borodino. Boom, 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 and do nothing. A plane load worth of extra death, week in and week out, in each of many countries all over the world, over and over, month after month, year after year. Ask nothing, say nothing. Instead, the extra thousands fall unnoticed or at least disregarded as inconvenient truth by the authorities nominally charged with our well-being. In England this year, excess death totals are up in all age groups, from youngest to oldest. Bigger numbers of heart failures, bigger numbers of deaths from other heart disease, bigger numbers of strokes, bigger numbers of deaths from circulatory diseases, bigger numbers of deaths from kidney disease. By the middle of 2023, in the UK, there were, according to the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, more than 36,000 excess deaths. 36,000 people dead against normal expectations in part of a single year. We're hardly alone in the loss. In the United States, the life insurance industry has reported a 24% increase in deaths of people aged 15 to 19 years, a 23% increase for 30 to 34-year-olds, a 25% increase in 40 to 44-year-olds. By the 30th week of this year, there were more than 147,000 excess deaths recorded in America. For the sake of comparison, the official tally of the US dead after 2 decades of war in Vietnam was just over 58,000 dead. Like here, the grim tally of excess deaths in the US involves bigger numbers of heart attacks in all age groups, bigger numbers for diabetes, bigger numbers for kidney disease deaths, bigger numbers for liver disease deaths. Like here, ask why, and the question falls on mostly deaf ears. The Society of Actuaries in the US, people in an industry where death costs money and reduces profits so that its professionals tend to know that of which they speak, predicts the numbers of excess deaths will continue to rise in the States in the years ahead. And so it goes on. Excess deaths up this year in Australia by more than 20% so far, up in Canada, up in Ireland, up in Netherlands, up in New Zealand. Are these numbers, these bald statistics in front of our faces, being reported worriedly or angrily by mainstream news? Are our politicians gathering hurriedly and en masse to ask questions and seek answers? Is the science under pressure to explain what's happening and thereby turn back the deadly tide? Like me, you know the answer to those questions is a resounding no. When a few brave souls do force the issue into the chamber of the House of Commons, the vast majority of our elected representatives stays away in droves. And so I ask again, how many dead will be enough? Which number? Look away from the mainstream media and towards independent sources of information, independent media, and there are more big numbers to be found and contemplated. Always, it's harder to find those numbers. Almost impossible, in fact, because they are deliberately overshadowed by others generated for bought and paid for stories in those medical journals and other publications that were once esteemed but now stand exposed as offering their reputations and credibility for sale to the highest bidder. A scientific paper published in Lancet last year claimed the rollout of the products marketed as vaccines against COVID saved tens of millions of lives. It was the work of a research group headed by Azra Ghani of Imperial College London and funded by, among others, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Gavi, the Global Alliance for Vaccines Initiative, also funded by Gates. Just to be clear, largely funded by bodies standing to make money from the sale of vaccine products. Azra Ghani has been a consultant for the World Health Organization and GlaxoSmithKline and was in favour of locking down and in favour of jabbing with those products throughout the pandemic. The claim of tens of millions of lives saved was based not on real-world data, but on mathematical modelling. In a critique for the Brownstone Institute, the paper was dismissed as, quote, no more than an opinion piece. As all work based on mathematical modelling must be, and yet its declaration about millions of lives saved went around the world and back again, eagerly quoted by countless politicians, physicians and mainstream media. Other websites carrying the findings of other mathematical modelling and statistical analysis by credible and esteemed scientists that find nothing less than the absolute contrary to the Ghani paper, that calculate numbers of deaths after the rollout of equivalent magnitude equal and opposite to those claims of lives saved. Why trust one set of figures from mathematical modelling or statistical analysis, broadcast and repeated to this day, while simultaneously ignoring and refusing to discuss others drawing alternative, indeed diametrically opposed conclusions? Why isn't all of this freely, openly and honestly discussed without prejudice by those notionally committed to saving lives? As I understand it, that's a big part of how science is supposed to be done. Big pharma giant Pfizer is being sued now by the state of Texas on behalf of more than 30 million people on the grounds that the company misrepresented its product. Pfizer claimed an effectiveness for its product of 95% or above. The Texas state prosecutor alleges an effectiveness of less than 1%. More numbers. Which to believe? In any event, is the action in Texas providing a big enough number? 30 million people. The AstraZeneca vaccine product is apparently defective, labelled thusly after being injected into hundreds of millions of arms, the arms of babies and pregnant women and the rest. The troubling, humbling numbers that keep me awake at night aren't restricted to the fields of medicine and the big pharma. I, for one, am also dizzied and horrified by the numbers of human beings, military and civilian, presently being harvested in wars and other conflicts around the world. 32 wars and conflicts, according to the Council on Foreign Relations Global Conflict Tracker, at this time of the year when, by tradition, we talk to each other about wishing peace and goodwill to all men. In Ukraine, 500,000 men, boys and women, Ukrainian and Russian both, are dead in an ongoing war that might have been ended months ago, not long after it began, in fact, if it hadn't been deliberately prolonged until billions of dollars, pounds and euros were pumped through that wounded, hemorrhaging heart, and thanks to their enablers in Washington, straight into the bank accounts of Raytheon, Boeing, Lockheed Martin and the rest of the arms manufacturers grown fat on the trillions of unaudited dollars that flow through the Pentagon every year. Millions, billions, trillions. How many more unimaginable numbers must we read or hear before we say collectively that enough is enough? How high must we count until the sickening shame of all the death sees someone somewhere sated and satisfied? How much bigger? How much higher? Mathematicians have a name for a number with 100 zeros or more. It's called a screech. Is that what it will take? A screech for all the dead and dying? How many more people must die in Gaza and the West Bank before the screech is heard and listened to? How many dead babies? How many dead babies is enough dead babies? How many more babies and toddlers and children and men and women, young and old, in the so-called Holy Land will be enough? Not enough so far, apparently, since the bombs still fall and the bullets still fly. I've said before, and I'll say again, that if you're feeling utterly overwhelmed, hopeless and helpless in the face of all that's happening around us, drowning among much else in numbers beyond comprehension, then that's because the intention of those above us in the food chain is that you should feel that way. The more you feel that way, for long enough, then, the thinking goes, the more likely it is you'll be receptive to whatever solutions you're offered, whichever remedies. When I was a little boy, every Christmas morning, my mum would play a song on the record player. It was When a Child is Born by Johnny Mathis. The lyrics are ingrained in me after all these years. A silent wish sails the seven seas, the winds of change whisper in the trees, and the walls of doubt crumble, tossed and torn. This comes to pass when a child is born. Sentimental? No doubt, but I like the thought of the winds of change. I also love the thought of children being born, the manifestation of all the hope in the world. Here's the thing, the numbers are so big now, the stakes are so high in the face of so much suffering, it all must crumble, and soon. When it does, when the reality lands at our feet, we'll have a choice, either to blindly stumble towards a dark place or to stop and take a stand against those who seek to take from the world and not to give. That's just me, of course. You're free to disagree. Later in the show, you'll hear, as I will, as we all will, from two doctors with differing opinions on my take. Keep all of your tweets and emails coming through the show. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk, and you can tweet me as well at gbnews, and I'll get to comments later in the show if time allows. Joining me tonight, television presenter, restaurateur, author and friend of mine, Tonia Buxton. Lovely to see you as always, Tonia. It's the season of goodwill to all men. We read all the time and hear all the time about these excess deaths and death and dying. What are we to make of it?
What you just said, though, about the feeling of hopelessness is what the agenda is. It's true. It's fear and hopelessness. That's what the agenda is. I mean, we know that. We know that from Laura Dodsworth's book, State of Fear, that they decided to do this to us. And then they therefore then decided to offer us these ridiculous ways out of hopelessness and fear. And it's now being proved that there are deaths that are unaccounted for, and that anyone with a commonsensical mind can see where they're coming from. And yet we're not allowed to discuss this, even on this channel here. I have to say there are those with other opinions to ours. I have to tread carefully. I'm not allowed to speak freely and speak truly for fear of being controlled, of being demonised or being penalised for speaking the truth.
Well, you happily give me your opinion.
Well, my opinion is this, that there is too much conflict and there was too much gain from the people that were in charge. This mathematical modelling that you're talking about, in Britain, for example, it was done by Ferguson at Imperial College, whose mathematical modelling has been wrong again and again and again. In 2005, he said that 2 million people would die of bird flu. Do you know how many died? 282, as opposed to his 2 million. These are the type of inflated numbers that he comes out with. He said that everybody was going to die of swine flu. A few hundred died again of that. And yet he was desperate to get a vaccine out, which actually ended up causing sleep apnea in young children, and those children are still suffering. He is wrong again and again, and yet he was the man that was put in charge with deciding what our fate was during this time. Why? Why? Would you keep hiring someone that gets it wrong every time?
Where those figures, I mean, I'm sure Neil Ferguson would say that he was following protocols and he was following procedures, but I for one continue to fail to understand why so much emphasis was put on modelling about what might happen based on data that was put into algorithms and came out with notional numbers, rather than actually paying proper, accurate attention to how many real-world people were dying in the real world.
If this had truly been the pandemic that they'd said it would be, we would have had people literally dying on the streets, like we saw the false footage coming from China of people just falling down in the streets. This didn't happen. None of this happened. And so, but you know, one of the problems, especially about this medication, is that everyone was made to feel. Now, you and I are very critical thinkers, but a lot of people were made to feel this is the only way forward, this is the only way to save their parents, to save their grandparents. And so they went ahead and took the arms of their children and put them in front of these things for medication they did not need. Because we do now know still that the age of death for COVID was 82.
What I want to know is, what is the explanation for the excess deaths? Whatever it is, there must be an explanation, but it's not being discussed.
No.
That's the point.
Because there was too much conflict and there was too much gain from this medication.
It's not enough. It's not enough for me that there are elephants in rooms that are not being contemplated. I just want an open and honest conversation about why more people are dying all of the time and are predicted to continue to die in those excessive numbers into the future. I just want a conversation about that and a demonstration of anxiety, at least, about why it's happening.
That would be what would happen in a truly democratic, open, true world that we live in. But we know that our media is not true. Nothing in the mainstream media. We know when we went through this lockdown, everything that happened, it was all lies. Lies, lies, lies. So you're never going to get a true and honest opinion unless people really do Start rising up. But most people who took their children, took themselves to get this medication, don't want to know. There is too much of this going on.
Yes.
They don't want the truth.
Not wanting to know. We're on a break already, after which I'll be joined by doctor and scientist Dr. Robert Malone to contemplate all of this, to contemplate this evolving situation, including the lawsuit involving Pfizer in the state of Texas. Don't go away.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Welcome back. My first guest this evening is Dr. Robert Malone, who has been part of the longer conversation about vaccines, about the COVID-19 pandemic, really from the beginning. We've had conversations on here more than once, and it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Malone again this evening. Hello, Dr. Malone. Thank you for being with us.
Hi, Neil. That was quite a speech. It reminded me of The Second Coming by Yeats. It had overtones of that famous.
It's a difficult time to sum up and to comment on, Dr. Malone. The safe and effective dogma relating to these vaccine products seems to be on increasingly shaky ground. How do you assess the situation, having been so closely involved in the story for such a long time?
So in my opinion, safe and effective has been repeated as basically a psychological manipulation tool because it's stated again and again as that pair of words without any qualification. Let's examine whether or not the product or the two products in particular, the mRNA products, are effective. It's indisputable that they do not prevent infection. They do not prevent replication. They do not prevent spread. They do not prevent disease, and they do not prevent death. Therefore, I assert they are not effective. Pfizer has now come down in its response to the Paxton suit that the products have some effect in reducing disease and death risk. That's actually a controversial statement. There are data that say otherwise. And so I assert that by any normal standard for a vaccine, these products are not effective. Are they safe? You just mentioned the excess all-cause mortality, and there are significant signals in a variety of international databases, including in the UK, Scotland, in Canada, in the United States, and of course in New Zealand and Australia, that there appear to be an unusual number of deaths associated with the products within a short period of time. That's setting aside the longer term risks. There's no question that we have a myocarditis signal. That's now widely accepted. And that myocarditis signal is not trivial. It's predominantly in younger people, more skewed towards men, but in both genders. And there are many, many other adverse events. And the way this is being handled in corporate media and through governments is to describe these as rare without qualifying what rare consists of. So this is also disputed. Whether these are rare or not is subjective, just like the statement safe and effective is subjective. So I assert that they are neither safe nor effective by any normal standard, such as those that have been applied for other medical products historically.
You've spoken also, I've read also your consideration of contamination within the products. Could you elaborate upon that and explain what it is that you make of the suggestion of contamination within the production process?
So, in particular, there's a scientist in the United States, Kevin McKernan, who deserves a shout out for this work. There are genomic specialists in the United States and Canada, and now across the world, that have analyzed the contents of the vaccines in terms of their genetic component and found that they have a significant level of DNA fragments in addition to the modified mRNA. And this has now been acknowledged by the European Medicines Agency, Health Canada, and the FDA. So this is not subject to debate. What we're down to is discussing whether or not that level of contamination, I say contamination because it was not previously disclosed. It's not on the label. And the regulatory agencies act as if they were unaware in many ways that this contamination existed. And as I said, we're down to arguing whether the level of contamination meets criteria for this formal term, adulteration, which in the United States would trigger a required withdrawal of the product. And also whether the level of contamination with these DNA fragments that come from the manufacturing process, whether they are a safe level in the sense that it's well known and documented and has been a concern of the FDA historically for well over a decade, that contamination with DNA in vaccine products can lead to a problem called insertional mutagenesis, which is to say that that DNA inserts itself into the genome of patients who receive the product. So this is a known risk. It's associated with cancer. It's specifically flagged by the FDA historically in multiple documents. It's also identified by Moderna in their own patents, in multiple patents, as a potential risk. of DNA in vaccine products or other genetic therapy products. And basically what's happened is that the FDA, Health Canada, and the European Medicines Agency are stonewalling on this issue, asserting that, well, they've done tests to demonstrate that these are safe levels. Now, what recently happened was that was challenged in a formal letter from Joe Ladapo, MD, PhD, doctor, and Surgeon General for the state of Florida. And Joe wrote a formal letter on the 6th to the FDA asking them specifically for information to demonstrate that these contaminations, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt, not call it adulteration. These contaminations are in fact at safe levels, and they will not impact on things like reproductive health. And what came back just yesterday from the FDA was a letter that basically obfuscates the issue, doesn't answer Dr. Ladapo's questions, and offers misrepresentations, miscitations, and seems to indicate a willful ignorance towards the problem and a denialism of any significant testing. It appears that the regulatory agencies of the world either were not aware of this problem or disregarded it and didn't require the normal testing that's been accepted for decades for assessing the risk of this type of contamination. In addition to the DNA contamination, we have another problem that's come up recently that had not been assessed or recognized by the pharmaceutical industry, Pfizer, Moderna, BioNTech, and that is a little more subtle. It's frame shifting. And what that problem, which is driven by the pseudouridine, for which the Nobel Prize was just awarded, results in proteins being produced in the cells of recipients that are not the intended spike protein. They're not characterized. We don't know what those proteins really are. We can predict them, as you were saying, from computer modeling. We know that they're occurring based on a recent publication, peer-reviewed, I believe in Nature, or one of the baby Natures. And once again, the regulators are turning a blind eye to this or denying that this represents a significant problem. Experienced pharmaceutical developers of biologics like this, many disagree with this position that this type of an artifact or complication is of no consequence. So that's where we stand right now.
Dr. Malone, I've run out of time, just regrettably. It's a distressing and fascinating litany that you offer there. Thank you so much once again, and I'm grateful for the, albeit limited, time that I've been able to share with you this evening. Thank you so much for that. We're on another break. Tonia, I don't know how you...
It's mind-blowing, isn't it? It's mind-blowing. They didn't do the proper tests, and now we're having to deal with other things as well. It's mind-blowing.
It's that, and that the tone of what we were listening to there I find so distressing. After the break, which is upon us again, I will be joined by Dr. David Strain, Associate Professor of Cardiometabolic Health at the University of Exeter, who says that the vaccines were key to controlling the virus. Don't go away.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there. with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. We're discussing the consequences of the products that were rolled out in the face of the COVID pandemic. We're all familiar with them. I was just talking there to Dr. Robert Malone, who has been a long-term questioner of the safety and efficacy of those products for all sorts of very specialised expert reasons. I was supposed now to be talking to Dr. David Strain, who has been a guest on here before, and the connection has been made. We do have Dr. Strain. Hello, thank you. I'm so relieved that we were able to make connection with you, Dr. Strain. A fellow scientist, Dr. Robert Malone, that we were just listening to, foundational in the development of the mRNA technology, talking about contamination, gaslighting of scientists, questioning safety and efficacy. Do you now, as an inquiring scientific mind, have questions about the products that are and have been out there as vaccines?
I have lots of questions, and we will continue to question this whole technology, as this is very likely to form the cornerstone of a considerable amount of the vaccines that we're going to have in the future. This technology that Robert was instrumental in developing. I mean, to be honest, in my opinion, his name should be on the Nobel Prize application, as his technology is what this microRNA technology is about. And it's also important to know that although he was questioning it, Robert himself had these vaccines even after his first infection. So once he had that natural immunity, because it was his technology. Now, going forward, he has always been, he's always declared himself to have been, in at the foundation levels of all of this. But here we are now. Pfizer being sued by the state of Texas for misrepresenting the product. Let's say the AstraZeneca product having been withdrawn, it's labelled as defective. And yet you say that we're continuing to develop the mRNA technology. Isn't it time to say, let's wait? Let's at the very least pause and see if this technology is appropriate at all.
So the mRNA technology is delivering something that our body makes itself. Our body makes mRNA, all of us, all of the time. And so the mRNA itself is a natural product. The bit that is special about these vaccines is the molecule that we code the mRNA to make. Now, in the case of the Pfizer and the Moderna BioNTech, that was making the spike protein, the bit of the protein that COVID actually caused COVID to do harm to us. And therefore, down the line, the fact that the COVID vaccine itself, the bit that made COVID do a tremendous amount of harm, that bit would cause a small amount of harm, because that's the way that the body had to learn to deal with it. And then, in the old days, the way we used to get rid of smallpox is by giving someone a different version of a pox in order they can get rid of it. You do a little bit of harm, the cowpox in that case, in order to prevent the smallpox. Now, the mRNA technology is not necessarily...
Oh, I've lost... I don't know if we still have the... Tonia, you've listened to Dr. Malone on one side with major questions about safety and efficacy. There's a physician that we've listened to before continuing to champion mRNA technology. As a mother, as a member of the human race, as an inquiring mind, how do you react to both of those stances?
Well, I run fleeing from the fact that he's saying we're just going to have to get used to mRNA vaccines because that's the future. What really blows my mind, and it still continues, is that they put this medication, they insisted on this medication on people that did not need it. And as Dr. Malone said, this whole safe and effective, wash my hands, safe and effective, it was a brainwashing tool. Mm-hmm. Nobody needed this medication. No one needed it. And even those now, there is questions as to whether the over 80s needed it. Young children don't need it. Babies don't need it. Infants don't need it. We know from right at the beginning of when COVID was released that even Ferguson and Valence themselves said it was flu-like symptoms in most people. So why are they shoving this medication in people's arms when they were quite capable of developing their own immunity and going on? Why?
What I want is a conversation. All of this, it's years now that this information has been circulating, looking for somewhere to go. And you would expect it to be discussed in a forum like the House of Commons or elsewhere in the public domain.
Or even the COVID inquiry.
How do you interpret, exactly, the COVID inquiry, how do you interpret this continual refusal, frankly, to contemplate both sides of this equation and try to find an answer for what's happening?
Look, let's just cut through this, shall we? The only reason that people don't want to have honest conversations is because they have conflict. And when I talk about conflict, is that a lot of people made a lot of money and they don't want it blasted out into the future. That's just the truth.
I've got Dr. Strain back. Dr. Strain, how about that? You're saying that we have to make space for the mRNA technology. Is that not just because vested interests are determined and committed to the money-making potential of this technology, regardless of its safety and efficacy?
So there are two separate issues, and I am not going to deny that there are definitely financial interests in both from Pfizer, from Moderna, and anybody else who's making the mRNA technology, because actually the ability to personalise a vaccine and potentially vaccinate against cancer, vaccinate against diseases that we can't treat at the moment is really attractive, and that's a reason why the mRNA technology is being focused. Now, I have to say, from my own point of view, I have absolutely no personal interest. I get no money from these pharmaceutical companies apart from money that goes directly to our university in order to try and evaluate the safety. And when we do evaluate the safety, we look at the safety and the efficacy as a balance. We always have to say, how many lives did we save with this vaccine versus how many people came to harm as a result of this vaccine? And there is always going to be a balance. And what we found with COVID COVID is that the balance was very much in favour. I'm not denying that there were some problems. Some people did get myocarditis from it. With the AstraZeneca vaccine, that was a very different technology, I hasten to add. The AstraZeneca vaccine is adenoviral vectors. Basically, it gives you one virus that has the DNA of the COVID vaccine inside you, and therefore you created it through a different route. With that technology, there were problems, and that's why it was withdrawn very, very quickly. With the mRNA technology, there has been some problems with the virus vaccine itself, but in just about every case so far, that's been attributed to the spike protein that the vaccine was coding for, rather than the technology. Now, it is going to continue to be investigated. I mean, Robert's work that gave us this mRNA vaccine actually started in 2012. It was 2014 that he identified these micelles that you could actually deliver the mRNA. So it's not brand new. It just got the last 2 to 3 years worth of research into it, got compressed very, very quickly to give us the COVID vaccine.
I've simply run out of time. At least I can say that I agree that we need to have an ongoing conversation. I certainly need to hear more about the problems and hear less of what I would characterise as the propaganda around promoting these products. Thank you so much for your time this evening, Dr. Strain. Pushed into another break as I am, after which I'll be joined by Fiona Pattinson. Complete change of tone. Fiona is the organiser of a Northumberland truck run in the interests of raising money for families facing food and fuel poverty. And that's definitely something that needs to be taken very seriously. Don't go anywhere.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Welcome back, and finally a Christmas event, one that's cemented its place in the calendar of Northumberland County. It's in its third year and it's growing all the time, raising thousands for charity. The organiser of the event, Fiona Pattinson, joins me now. Hello, Fiona.
Hi.
This is lovely, Fiona. We've got, I think, drone footage of the vehicles making their way. How did this come about? Whose idea was it?
So there's Alex McLennan from the Forestry Commission approached me and said, "Oh, do you think this would be quite a nice idea? We've got the Coca-Cola wagon, but we could do something bigger, better, and more interesting." And I was like, "Yeah, we'll go for it." First year we did it in 2021, and we had 18 wagons. We based it. It was more like a thank you to the timber wagons for COVID and the villages. To put up with the wagons kind of coming through, and it's grown since then. And this year we've had 138 wagons and vans in the convoy.
It looks just lovely. I have to say, it makes me think of the that legendary Christmas holiday television advert for a popular fizzy drink. With the song is running through my head, although I won't deliver it now. So colourful, so positive. It must be a big hit with the communities and children.
Massive. The support on the streets this year was just phenomenal. Seeing everybody lined up as you're driving through, and the positive comments afterwards, saying everybody's looking forward to next year already. Is just brilliant.
Yeah, Tonia, lovely to after heavy conversation. That footage, isn't it cheering and uplifting?
Just smiling at it, and I just love the idea of everyone coming out and cheering and seeing that. It's just what we need this time of year. Some joy. And
the idea that it's gone from strength to strength. How much money has been made, and to which charities will it go, Fiona?
So up to now we've made 10,068 pence, and that is split between the Great North Air Ambulance and Santa's Little Helpers.
I'm just running out of time on you there, Fiona, but I cannot thank you enough for bringing that little bit of Christmas cheer to us. Thanks to all my guests. Tonia, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to have you here. And I think it's important as well that we were able to end on a brightly lit, colourful, uplifting note. All my guests, Robert Malone, David Strain, Fiona Pattinson. Next up, it's the Saturday 5, but first, as I understand it, you have to receive an update on the latest weather. See you soon.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. Rain warnings are in force across western Scotland throughout this evening and overnight, with potential for a month's worth of rain falling by the time we reach the end of the weekend. So do take care here. Elsewhere it will be a drier night, still some outbreaks of drizzle to watch out for, and the cloud will also be thickening in. Where you hold on to a few clearer spells, you might see the odd mist patch, temperatures perhaps getting down into 6-7 degrees Celsius, but elsewhere it will be an unseasonably mild night, not falling much lower than 10 or 11 degrees Celsius for Northern Ireland and Scotland. That rain then in place still for western Scotland. It will be persistent throughout the day on Sunday. Potential for flooding and transport disruption, even some landslides due to this amount of rainfall. Again, England and Wales should stay drier, the cloud wanting to break its way up into the afternoon, particularly to the eastern side of the country. Temperatures here again 11, perhaps ranging into 13 degrees Celsius. As we head into Monday, that frontal system that is stuck across northern Scotland will slowly drift its way southwards, now spreading more into Northern Ireland, Northern England, parts of Wales as well. Will turn into quite a drab, dreary and damp day for many of us. The far southeast perhaps staying drier, still with a fair amount of cloud around, but some brighter spells pushing their way into the far northwest of Scotland with a few showers, but also some fresher and cooler conditions. So temperatures will be falling their way off across northern areas of the UK as we head throughout next week.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling